Hello everyone, today we read and comment on the third chapter of the first book of von Clausewitz, Vom Kriege. The text follows. War is the province of danger, and therefore courage, above all things, is the first quality of a warrior. Courage is of two kinds. First, physical courage, or courage in presence of danger to the person. And next, moral courage, or courage before responsibility, whether it be before the judgment seat of external authority or of the inner power, the conscience. We only speak here of the first. Courage before danger to the person, again, is of two kinds. First, it may be indifference to danger, whether proceeding from the organism of the individual, contempt of death, or habit. In any of these cases, it is to be regarded as a permanent condition. Secondly, courage may proceed from positive motives such as personal pride, patriotism, enthusiasm of any kind. In this case, courage is not so much a normal condition as an impulse. We may conceive that the two kinds act differently. The first kind is more certain because it has become a second nature, never forsakes the man. The second often leads him farther. In the first there is more of firmness, in the second of boldness. The first leaves the judgment cooler, the second raises its power at times, but often bewilders it. The two combined make up the most perfect kind of courage. So, fairly short passage this time, but nevertheless very important as always. In this passage, von Clausewitz introduces us to the concept of courage, right? So, war is the province of danger, as we have seen in the previous paragraphs, in the previous chapters, actually. And therefore, courage, above all things, is the first quality of a warrior. This is particularly important. Remember the Clausewitzian trinity when von Clausewitz associates to the military effectively the gaming nature, the gambling character. Well, this is exactly it. I mean, the one who actually fights the war, here it's translated as warrior, and Kriege in German is, kind of the warrior, but not in the tribalistic sense of the term as it's adopted and wildly now in popular culture. It's literally the man of war that is different from the warrior as we mean it from the past, conventionally speaking, opposed to the soldier, the disciplined soldier. So necessarily, Vu basically has to fight. The person who has to go out there and to risk, obviously, is confronting danger, and above all things, right, courage is required as a quality of this warrior. So it's as if, secondarily, as if danger effectively was the most important element out there. And if you reflect about it, it is. When we think about war, we, especially in this, trying to build a theory of it and making sense out of it, we try to extraneate, saying, okay, well, yeah, danger and fear and courage from the other side, etc. All is we know it's part of combat, but it's there. But we have to think at the higher levels where we can kind of detach ourselves from that. Well, that's a mistake. When you study war, you can't take out of account the inherent danger that happens out there. It's not like dancing, right? Say you start a war, there's just this elegant duel that is chivalrously led, and people die at the bottom, but still at the top it really permeates the damn whole thing. So here the warrior is not to be conceived, by the way, as just a guy on the front line that stays under, mortar shells and then machine gun fire. This is really whoever actually fights, throughout all the ranks, and who is to take responsibilities, by the way, that the higher you go in the hierarchy, high up you go in the hierarchy, the more become, this is perhaps difficult to define, but it's kind of definitely become more difficult to bear. I mean, obviously, the guy on the front line is risking everything, right? He's just there under fire, can die from a moment to another. The general in the headquarters, far away from relatively far away, at least from the front line, says, okay, well, I'm saving her, but it's still deciding for the fate of many that are dying or living because of his decisions ultimately. So the whole military element is permeated by the foe, by danger, and that's really the dominant element in there, and that's why the dominant quality of a warrior has to be courage, right? So let's define this courage. Von Clausewitz writes, courage is of two kinds. First, physical courage, or courage in the presence of danger to the person, right? And next, moral courage, or courage before responsibility, whether it be before the judgment seat of external authority or of the inner power, the conscience. And here we only speak of the first. So von Clausewitz basically makes this great categorization. There are two kinds of courage. One is the one that basically is on you physically, right? You are threatened by something that can effectively damage you pretty massively, even up to killing you. Then there is another form of courage that has a sort of moral, and strictly meant moral character that has to do with the responsibility. And this is this division, it has to do in this sense with the judgment of an external or superior authority, or the inner power, the conscience. Now, von Clausewitz says here we discuss basically only the first one. It's as if the other one, for now, didn't interest him. And this is particularly interesting philosophically speaking, and honestly I can't tell you why here von Clausewitz is leaving it out. Apparently, von Clausewitz is interested always into practical, measure. I can't say measurable because, of course, he said that there is no way to measure something that is, first of all, ever changing. So you always have to catch up with it. But let's say something that is real, right? That has an impact on how things happen, and that's the reason why it makes me wonder, because actually human actions are influenced by this kind of moral courage, as he calls it, right? There is always a moment in which you reflect on what you're doing and you say, am I doing it right? I mean, what others are going to think, or what at least what consequences there can be out there socially for my behavior, and secondly, and perhaps more, and definitely most importantly, I would say, but they are still compenetrated, the one by the other. The inner power of conscience. That is to say, okay, let's assume I can't do the worst evil ever, nobody will ever know. Will I still be able to bear it? Well, it turns out that, clinical psychology tells us that it's not the case, but this is something that even Dostoevsky tells you, even Nietzsche tells you, there is nothing like that. I mean, we are programmed to have, to behave in a way that is at least socially functional, right? The idea that conscience exists because we feel that there is something beyond just individualism and strictly ourselves, and we are social, at least social individuals that therefore exist and are defined together with others. So it's this is definitely a very deep topic that von Clausewitz touches. But now that I'm thinking about it, von Clausewitz, not even for a time, for example, ever addressed religion. I mean, here we have the man of the 19th century that has his own views and beliefs, etc., that doesn't take and doesn't bring, very cleverly in my opinion, this, if you want, fideistic approach to this theory, because von Clausewitz here, in my opinion, is discarding at this point the second form of courage as something that is too, I can't say unpredictable, or not even irrelevant in absolute terms. It's something that really goes beyond really what happens in everyday life, not just in combat, not just in the fight, in war, right? And I believe that here von Clausewitz has gotten one of the, at least the best explanation that I'm coming up with. I'm not entirely sure whether it's true, but I think that here, and you can answer to this question by yourself at the same time, because you all can always test what von Clausewitz is telling you on yourself. This is one of the most extraordinary things in the Vom Kriege. Is think yourself in being into a fight, right? And think about what really leads you at this point. Is there a squabble in there? I mean, it happens. Yes, it happens that you have incredibly often that you have someone in your aim point, while you're pointing the rifle at this person, you're not able to shooting. It happens all the times in war, simply because humans are not made to kill other humans cold-blooded, right? And it turns out most humans do not even intend to engage in such things, but in war, not even the majority of troopers are naturally predisposed to kill in that way. Today, that's the reason. This something was figured out actually pretty late in time, after World War II. Well, there were some military men that made a survey on former veterans of the conflict, and it turned out an astonishingly low number of them actually shot even in the direction of the enemy. So let's leave aside even the concept of hitting him. But this comes actually from other factors, in my opinion. What von Clausewitz is saying here, according to me, is that this kind of moral courage that derives from this social responsibility of inner conscience, etc., really something that gives way in combat. Like it's highly it's as if combat was such a coincided moment that you don't really care at that point, and it's as if there was still a burden that is related in part to this form of morality, if we want, but that at the same time doesn't quite come to influence combat, because combat has in itself much higher impact on your moral records. I mean, war there is this jarring sometimes contrast between what war is in reality and what we think or wish it was in the first place, and then there are naturally people who despise war in itself, like saying that's all evil point. But it turns out that even the most moral cause, if you want, and even when it's actually waged with that intention, that direction, cannot contravene the laws of war in the way it really works. I mean, and this is what von Clausewitz says at the beginning of the work, when he says, it's pretty naive and actually a pretty big mistake to pretend that war can be fought trying to have in its aim the let's say this humanitarian hope to shed as least as blood as possible, right? That's something really incongruent. That's a mistake. There is a contradiction in that thing, and it turns out that if you actually follow that humanitarian belief, you're going to make war worse, because it's gonna be protracted unnecessarily over time. More people will kill, more people even than necessary, just for thinking that it was an aim that you should put at the base of all war. So, and there are lots of people that believe this actually, and lots of people who pretend that there is something moral in the way a war is waged. Wars are waged always in the same way, which is not an approximation, like saying, wars are waged always in the same way because people always make the same mistakes all the time. No. It's really war that works that way, and you can't change it, because changing it would be, exposing yourself to failure. So it's as if this sensitivity, I don't even know how to say that, was overrun by the reality of war in the moment in which it's waged. And let's be honest about this. In combat, there are certain, parts of ourselves that are activated to act, to behave, that go beyond this. I mean, when you're under, you're fighting, and there is someone from the other side is trying to gun you down, essentially. It's not that you think much about what your inner moral convictions are, or what you try at least to react in a way that can be more or less courageous. Let's say in the range of the first type of courage that von Clausewitz has identified, but that, however, takes into consideration that I'll think about my conscience later. Let's try to get the hell out of here in the first place now, alive, hopefully, or in one piece. So I believe that this is really the need why von Clausewitz puts aside that other type of courage. It's not because it doesn't actually influence, for example, politics or society. It evidently does. We all talk about conscience. We're all more or less concerned actually about it, or at least even if we're not, we are faced with it constantly in everyday life, and we have to deal with this philosophically, existentially, and morally at the end of the day. So that's why here von Clausewitz rightfully calls it moral courage, right? So here von Clausewitz speaks of the first, and talking about it, I would say that there is this brilliant emphasis given by the author on the concept of physicality, right? Here what he calls the physical courage, that is the courage in presence of the danger to the person. This is extremely important, because that danger that we were talking about before, relative to the first phrase, is exactly this. I mean, one thing is studying war when you sit in here and you read a military history book and you say, well, okay, this is more or less, I mean, you give for granted, at least, you tend at least to give for granted that there are people on the ground dying, right? That's literally, and let's be honest about it, it's the last thing you think about. When you say, okay, well, at the end of the let's say, of the story, you read thousands of dead, you say, oh, wow, that's a heavy toll. But you think, actually, the guy that is dead or dying, and you don't take into account the crucial moment before that, before the exposure to to the danger to the person and its body, because that's what we're set on when we're exposed to danger, to try to go back, because we say, hell, here we can get blown up, and we can die from a moment to another, we can get maimed horribly, etc. And that's really what makes you reconsider wanting to go to war. And this is, by the way, one of the first reasons why war is absolutely not something instinctive, but it's a product of civilization. It's actually a reasonable activity, meaning it's a rational, at least it's led rationally. It never comes because someone, decided weirdly, or because there is a sick taste for it. Whoever tells you that war is just a sort of lust that human beings have because they're naturally evil, well, do not really take into consideration as, because it's a sick twist, right? Consider always the evil of human nature, but do not think that war is the imminent product of it. That's really not. That's not really into it. That's not. It pertains to politics, really. The way you kill people is something that, genetically, you're not really programmed to do. So there is something that pushes you to do it, that is actually some pressure of sorts that is, whatever it is not really normal. That's why it's been always compulsory to go to war, because people wouldn't normally. It's not that people were always happy to history to go up there and slaughter their fellow men just for the sick taste of it. It doesn't work like that. That's against any kind of culturalism and primitivism, for which, primitivism, not really, but this culturalist idea more than else that war is just hubris. Culturalism is just hubris. War is the product of it's one of the most sophisticated and developed products of civilization. Doesn't matter that it's also potentially one of its greatest destroyer, incidentally, but it's also many other things, and it helped dramatically civilization to develop and to refine, among the other things. But it's still something different. So that's why courage is important, because it's primarily not something that has to deal with throwing a dice in this sense. That's something you have to do when you choose to go to war. Then courage has to be tested afterwards, when you're really in the face of the enemy, in the presence of danger to your person, to your physicality, right? And think about it. Think about it for 1 second. Those moments in which you you tend to ignore when you study these things. Think of what it means to be in the face of the enemy, and to have projectiles whistling around you. What is very interesting here is that von Clausewitz at one point, actually in a few time now, we'll talk exactly about that. He will basically lead you to the front. He tells you the story of how it is to approach a front line from certain distance and showing you what the hell is going on. He says, at the beginning you're terrified, but you see explosions, people dying, people next to you being killed, etc. But you know what? After kind of a half an hour, you get used to that. And this is really how it is. And that's why also, all this question, but how can you do? For example, personally, I find extremely difficult to conceive the risk of going out there. And that's actually, and I know I'm wrong. I know that the question, that the wondering is legitimate, but that's how strong actually the motives of a war can be. And this is a testament, by the way, to the extreme privilege that we have to live in the period that we do, where everybody is whining and complaining, and yet we live in the best imaginable way it's ever happened ever in human history, and we still complain and bitch about it, and that's pretty stupid and childish. There are very valid reasons that are also very coldly calculated, especially in war, that in this decisional phase. In fact, it's one of the most rational choices you can ever do, to risk your life. Because most of the times it's really because the option is unbearable, right? So that's why things, and how many episodes in history have to be read, not because someone was greedy or so evil, etc., but because there were reasons that pushed the whole thing to happen. Even when it comes actually to the decision of some twisted, crazy, megalomaniac leader that wants to expand his prestige and charisma, well, most of the times it's not really like that, because you hardly find a society where literally, even in the most perfect totalitarianism, which it's really the leader that decides everything and everybody follows just because they are pushed to do it on the point of a bayonet. There is always a broader political and social consensus, and this is also pretty valuable occasion to admonish you. Everybody who tells you, that guy went to kill other people just because if he hadn't done it would have been shot. Well, yeah, that's kind of a valuable motivation, but it's not a justification. And still there has to be some form of commitment in that sense, and there is nothing heroic in that, not even if you do it for some higher reason, or you try to mask that, even worse, for other reasons. like say we thought we were going to go there because of our country. Well, that's not really an excuse. That's not really what you're supposed to think, even as a citizen of your own country, especially when your country in the process gets maybe annihilated. And that's, I think, the history of the 20th century has been pretty eloquent about this. But leaving this aside, let's proceed to see what this first type of physical courage, or courage in presence of the danger to the person, is, because there are in turn other two kinds. Here von Clausewitz writes courage before danger to the person, again, is of two kinds. First, it may be indifference to danger, whether proceeding from the organism of the individual, contempt of death, or habit. In any of these cases, it is to be regarded as a permanent condition. So, basically, there is one kind, in turn, of this physical courage that can that basically translates itself as sort of indifference to danger. So, what this means is that this, and it's generally a permanent condition, as von Clausewitz calls it. Now, if you read this, I believe that it's evident, at least, that von Clausewitz is not making here a quest for the existence of a total indifference of certain type of humans to such threat to themselves, to their same existence, right? So this permanent condition is very relative. It's not absolute, right? And there is no one who is indifferent to danger. Also, because if it was the case, like the world species, I mean, if we were so as a species, we would all be extinct, or at least that person who has this absolute indifference to danger would, because it's not, you can grow old by having this kind of inclination. But so it's absolute, but it can proceed in here from Clausewitz. Most importantly, here makes the list of what can produce this kind of indifference, this degree of indifference. First of all, it can be, here it says, from the organism of the individual. Well, what this means is, in my opinion, the sort of connaturate characteristic of that you simply say, okay, I'm indifferent to danger because I have strong nerves. I don't really have anything. I mean, I observe, I acknowledge the risk, but I don't really care more than much. I can die, but I still can calculate that, and that can come from your guts. It's the organism of the individual, in my opinion, that I really like this. The contempt of death, that is also another. Okay, well, I don't care. I don't know where this may stem. It sounds something maybe philosophical. Say, okay, well, we all have to die, or maybe this is, if I really have to do it, maybe it's better in this way than another. At least I choose my destiny, let's put it in this way, but it can really derive from other conditions, or habit, right, that you get used to it. And von Clausewitz tells us further that happens over time. I mean, the more you're exposed to risk, and generally, you tend to go with it. I mean, there are extremely, and this happens enormously, I mean, in a very evident way in human nature, because let's see, there are many risky things that we do every day. For example, I drive my motorcycle, and actually I'm pretty obsessed by fearing accidents and stuff like that, but still I take the motorcycle. Because it turns out the calculation I make to say, okay, well, this is probably one of the riskiest means of travel that exists. But hey, I need it. It's kind of easy, and I can go wherever I want. I can park wherever I want or stuff like that. Just I try not to go out there when it rains. But I still realize when I drive that I'm constantly exposed to risk, and yet I do it. And maybe I avoid like the plague, many other activities that actually are way less risky, like taking a plane, for example, because maybe you think, oh well, what if it falls? Stuff. But it turns out it's like a chance over millions, while it's much easier to die when you drive a motorcycle. So this tells you, this is testament naturally to the pretty unreasonable human nature in many ways. But let's say that habit, the constant exposure to danger, usually brings you to, if anything, to cope with it in a way or another. That is basically not really convincing yourself that this is not really a risky thing, but simply putting yourself in the right state of mindset that is something you have to work on. It's not really immediate. Your mind, let's say, is enough fluid and flexible to even to have a sort of autonomous component in this sense, but of adaptation. But still, it's something you have to condition yourself in a way for. And I suspect that actually these three let's say origins to this indifference towards danger are here meant by von Clausewitz like all influencing each other. Also because here it doesn't quite explain why it happens, right? At least for now. So I believe that it's mostly actually indifference to danger is actually stemming in this sense from a mix of all these three elements, right? That obviously vary in every individual by a certain degree. So what here in conclusion von Clausewitz writes to this phrase is that this is to be regarded as sort of permanent condition, which doesn't really mean that there is a let's say a sort of stable indifference to danger. Indifference to danger obviously varies wildly because, first of all, because it's the same danger that varies wildly, and sometimes danger is evidently overwhelming, for which you don't have. But here it really matters in the way you react to it. That is to say, if you see that you're gonna die and that nothing good, for given the reasons you're out there, is gonna it's gonna be worth it. Basically, you simply give way, even if you are the most courageous and indifferent to danger person in the world. But here it's really different. It's something that basically makes you cope with it, and it's remarkable, by the way, how sometimes human minds are set on such let's say on such indifference, right? There are many maybe examples are difficult to make, because obviously that can be seen pretty much everywhere in the way you can be exposed to danger and still accepting it. It happens literally at every moment. But this is something that basically remains as something you can make, you can trust, right, upon. Like that soldier, for example, is reliable because you have tested the person many times. Now maybe this part I'm suspecting that in this passage maybe there is something that doesn't necessarily correspond. I mean, things can be really a bit more complicated than this. But still, by approximation, given that these are not absolute measures, let's say, we see that they really remain as sort of approximately permanent conditions in the indifference to danger. As the second type of courage in here, so it's as if the first one was a bit more natural. It's something that has to do with your really your more strictly physical sphere. It's the way you really are in terms of mind and soul by default, right? Secondly, here, courage may proceed from positive motives such as personal pride, patriotism, enthusiasm of any kind. In this case, courage is not so much a normal condition as an impulse. So, there is this other type of physical courage that stems from things like personal pride, patriotism, enthusiasm of any kind. So here, maybe from Clausewitz, here especially this enthusiasm of any kind it's difficult to frame, because I still believe that all these factors are all compenetrated in the two kinds of physical courage. I don't think that there is even enough scientific consensus to say, well, this is really there is this sharp distinction you can take as. But here the difference that von Clausewitz, still in relative terms in my opinion, makes is that in this case this form of courage is not so much a normal condition as an impulse. That is to say, this is a sort of more artificial, if you want, and self-inducted form of excitement, more than just, I mean, it's still courage, it can still fuel your emotions, but it's something that can, in fact, it's not normal. It's not a permanent condition. It doesn't stem from how much guts you have, but what you're thrilled by at the moment. And this is important because it's not permanent, even. It's something that you may have, you know, it's like, okay, let's all go to war. Then when you're there in the trench, you say, oh, what the hell? Maybe you did it for personal pride or patriotism or any enthusiasm, and they're all blended, actually. They're all mixed at all times, in my opinion. But you're regretting it. So, von Clausewitz, in fact, I like how he, relatively simple but also relatively soft is giving the boundaries of this forms of courage, because here in fact says we may conceive that the two kinds act differently, right? So he himself doesn't tell this is the things can vary wildly. That's what he really wants to tell you. So although he says the first kind of courage, of physical courage, is more certain because it has become a second nature. You see here what we said before. The first type of physical courage is really a part of the way you're shaped. Never forsakes the man. Here is pretty absolute, in never, but it's also in here. It's something that remains, but it can partly stimulate. The second often leads him farther. This is also particularly important because it's in the first one it's really a nature, a condition, so that's more solid, but at the same time it doesn't really push you. It doesn't really give you a motivation. It's simply the way you react naturally to the thing. The second one instead often leads men further. And the way it happens is that it gives you a sort of artificial reason for it in a way or in another. It's as if it was, it brought you to another place that is also particularly tricky now, as we see, because in the first there is more of firmness, von Clausewitz writes, in the second of boldness. The first leaves the judgment cooler, the second raises its power at times but often bewilders it. The two combined make up the most perfect kind of courage, right? So that's the big thing, that there are these two different forms of courage. That one is the one that really belongs to yourself, and you can't really, you can modify at least, but with great difficulty. It may even change with age, right, with certain experiences, but fundamentally belongs to you as if at the moment, as a permanent character. The second one is it can excite you. There is this new idea, this new belief that you're in love with, and you feel that it's so inspiring. It can bring you very far, because before you get to the real fight is it might have compromised you, even for fighting itself, but it's still something that can fail you, right? Arrived at the moment, it can have made you make miscalculations. That's the problem. The first has to do chiefly with firmness, the second chiefly with boldness. Being bold and courageous are two slightly different things, right? And here, by the way, courage, in fact, is to be understood in the broader concept, right? In the broader idea, this ability to overcome fear. That's as neutral as you can go with it. It's not really being bold or excited at the time. It's really the way you react most of the times. So the first one doesn't push you. It basically tells you, well, we are the way we are, don't worry. You don't even think about it most of the time. So it doesn't alter your judgment. The second one, instead, can really make you make a lot of mistakes, because it can give you, let's say, a greater aim, something that there's more far. It will take you more far at the end of the day, but it's still something partially disconnected with your nature. It's very idealistic in many ways, and we know how idealism is important, and how it really brings to this kind of feeling, but it's still very it can make you achieve great things ideologically, but still it can get crushed with the reality. That is, you can excite very much your intellect, but at the point it makes you surpassing the reality check, saying, okay, well, it's as if that didn't count, because I just think this is cool now. So but von Clausewitz says, in fact, here something very wise and very realistic at the same time. It's that the two forms of courage combined make up the most perfect kind of courage. That is to say, you can be firm and cold-blooded, but you still have a reason to be courageous. I mean, you can't risk if you don't have a greater aim, right? But at the same time, you can be, and at the same time, by the way, let's say you can be bold and having this most evident, cocky and even arrogant character that makes you pretend that you're gonna make it, etc. But even your nature may fail you at that point, because maybe you arrived in front of the enemy, you get scared, and you say, oh well, I didn't think it was so hard to resist it, and you give way. So the ideal is that these two tendencies are combined. So, and you immediately understand from this that it's relatively rare to find someone that has these two types of courage, of physical courage, existing at the same time. I think most of the people are either, mostly one or the other. I mean they're both things at the same time, and obviously in absolute terms it's always being, more one or the other. But it also depends. This thing has to be measured on the base of what kind of danger you're exposed to, and that's where courage is really needed. But in that case, the higher the danger is, and I believe the higher it is the difference in potential between these two kinds of courage. That is to say, maybe you can raise one of the two very high, even, but it's rare that it's going to be with the other one at the same level, and therefore it's going to be a problem. So you ideally need both this kind of natural courage that you feel within yourself, because you're basically naturally working that way, and a motive that spurs you, that makes you feel that you're gonna make it, but that also makes you have to take action in danger, right? So it's extremely important to consider this this nature, this double nature of courage, when thinking what really courage is, because these moral qualities are very composite. It's not easy. Sometimes we think that courage is just one type, fundamentally. That that guy is just either a courageous person or a coward. Well, it turns out that, psychologically speaking, is dramatically changing, even at the same time within the same person. I mean, it makes a lot of difference. Even things like what time of the day it is, if you have eaten or not, and therefore also in here, von Clausewitz is talking about of courage, let's say, extrapolated from the various combinations that can exist, that he will list ahead afterwards, and that you will see that are fairly more complicated and than it apparently seems, and that it's very difficult to find some, because, by the way, this is just courage. This is not really what it takes, but this is, let's say, a solid base that you need in order to accomplish certain results. I mean, you can't really be just a smart person and then courage, maybe not so much, to be a good warrior. You necessarily have to take it, because that has nothing even just to do with the physical exposure in a strictly material way, I suppose. I think it's something broader. It's even the fear you can have in the anticipation of a terrible moral pain, for example. That is why even a general has to bear the burden of lots of people's lives, or even just, maybe let's assume is a person very devoid of scruples, and say, just the reaction that will ensue after, in terms of responsibility for what he has done or what has not done, for which he is responsible. So that's why, in part, there is also the differentiation between the physical courage and the moral one, because in part they're still different things, and from this passage I can't really tell you precisely what the boundaries are. I think the more we go on in here, the better we will look at it. But it's important to distinguish, however, very simply, these concepts, because they're going to be useful afterwards as a base. So quite simply, there are two kinds of courage. That is physical courage and moral courage. And the physical courage is the one coming from, nature. The other one coming from boldness, right? It comes from ideas broadly meant. And the first one stems from firmness. The second one comes from boldness. And it the best option is that is to have them combined, because they both lack essentially that they're not independent. The best option is always to have both of them at the same time, right? To have someone who can firmly endure fear that is always there, because it's not that fear is absent, that there is just a capacity in here to counter it, but also having a vision, and in the sense, okay, let's risk this, and I will take the risk on the base of what I presume is going to happen, because at the base it's still danger, because there is still danger because you effectively don't know what is going to happen, and that's where you have to bet. Okay, so I don't know whether this video was so clear personally, but I hope at least it renders the idea. So this was, and then we will pass to eventually the physical sufferances and efforts, etc. That is also particularly important. It's going to be a very long chapter actually to look at. And for now, I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it, otherwise leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming contents. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.